Welcome to the Daily Report. It's January 14th here in Korea. I'm Min Sun-hee. The cap on gatherings has been eased, paving the path for up to 6 people to meet socially here on the local front. We have details after a check of the global COVID-19 tallies with our Kwon So-ah. So how is Korea ending the work week?
Sunny, we are heading into the weekend with a slight increase in COVID-19 infections. A little over 4,500 cases were tallied as of 12 a.m. this Friday. And that is a rise in both domestic infections as well as cases from abroad. In fact, 409 represents the highest ever number of imported cases here in the country. Now, there's been a rise by 376 cases from the day before. But unfortunately, also when we compare the figure to last Friday, it is an on-week increase. And if we go over to the number of fatalities, 49 people have lost their lives in the past day, raising the death toll to 6,259. But the good news is that the number of patients that are in severe or critical condition is gradually going down. And for the first time in 45 days, this number has dropped to the 600s. And that's also thanks to an increase in vaccinations as well as booster shots. First off, we've got here 86.6% of the nation's population that got at least one shot and 84.5% who are fully vaccinated. Also, now 43.7% have gotten an additional dose, with more than 335,000 people having gotten that extra shot a day ago. Now let's move over to our map. As we can see, there is quite a gap now between the infections in Seoul and Gyeonggi-do province. There's been actually a decrease in the capital Seoul, but in the other parts of the metropolitan region, there was an increase. And in other parts, we're seeing a mix of double digits as well as triple digits. Moving to other places around the world, the U.S. has hit 65 million cases in total. And also France hit the 13 million mark with more than 305,000 new infections. Also 6-digit figures in Italy as well as Spain in the past day. And globally, more than 3.3 million new cases were tallied in the span of 24 hours as of noon Korea time. And those are the general updates that I have for now, but I'll see you back in a bit. Sunny?
Right, so those were the global tallies of the past 24 hours. Back here in Korea, authorities have extended COVID-19 prevention guidelines for 3 more weeks starting next Monday, albeit with a slight ease for social gatherings. Choi Min-jung joins me now. Min-jung, good to see you again.
Thank you for having me.
Right, let's start with the restrictions themselves.
Well, the measures have been extended, but they are relaxed to a certain extent. The country's prime minister announced on Friday that the limit on social gatherings will be raised from the current 4 to 6 people. But operating hours for businesses will still be limited to 9 p.m. amid lingering concerns over the country's COVID-19 situation. Let's take a listen to what the prime minister said.
The number of infections is no longer declining since this week. The Lunar New Year holiday is also coming up in 2 weeks, which is when people will travel a lot. The Omicron variant has also begun to spread rapidly since last week. On Wednesday, Omicron infections accounted for 20% of the total infections. It is closer to becoming the dominant strain.
The new measures will take effect for 3 weeks starting next Monday until February 6th, as the current measures are set to last until Sunday. This means the rule will be in place during Seollal, the Korean Lunar New Year holiday period as well. And the Prime Minister has advised citizens to practice social distancing as much as possible during the holiday.
Right, and on the treatment front, Min-jung, as you've been reporting over the past few days, the first batch of Pfizer's antiviral COVID-19 treatment pills arrived here in the country on Thursday, right? Tell us more.
Right, Sunny. The first shipment of Pfizer's pills arrived at Incheon Airport on Thursday afternoon, and they were delivered to a logistics center in Chungcheongbuk-do province later in the day. The initial batch is enough to treat 21,000 people, and of this amount, 70% is currently in transit for immediate distribution nationwide. Deliveries began at around 2 a.m. on Friday to around 280 pharmacies, as well as 89 residential treatment centers. Most will arrive at their destinations sometime today, and more remote regions like Jeju and other islands will receive them by Saturday. The remaining 30% will be kept in reserve at the logistics center, and they'll be supplied to regions where the pills are needed most, perhaps in places where infections are surging.
Right, of course. Now, on a more concerning note, Min-jung, as So-ah mentioned earlier, Korea reported yet another record high in imported cases, with many of them, I understand, linked to people returning from the Consumer Electronics Show over in Las Vegas last week.
Right. The number of imported cases, as you said, has again hit a record high on Friday with 409 cases. And Korea has also identified more COVID-19 infections among people returning from the Consumer Electronics Show, which was held in Las Vegas last week. As of Thursday, a total of 119 Korean attendees have tested positive for COVID-19. According to authorities, Omicron infections have also been identified in the pool, and given that the variant represents around 98% of cases in the U.S., it's highly likely that Omicron is responsible for the majority of imported cases linked to the trade show. And in light of this reality, authorities have decided to impose stricter quarantine measures for inbound travelers. Starting January 20th, everyone arriving in Korea must use designated buses, trains, and taxis that have been set aside to ferry travelers from abroad. This means these people will not be able to use public transportation, but they will be allowed to use their own personal vehicles. And on top of that, those scheduled to arrive in Korea will be asked to submit a negative PCR test taken no more than 48 hours ahead of their departure time. Currently, people are required to do this up to 72 hours before their flight.
Right, I see. And Minjung, what is the latest with regard to the legal battle over vaccine passes here in the country?
Well, Sunny, a court decision on the fate of the country's vaccine pass mandates may be handed down as early as today. A week ago, a court hearing took place after more than 1,000 people from the country's healthcare and religious communities filed a complaint against Korean health authorities. They demanded that the government repeal vaccine pass requirements at most venues, including restaurants and cafes. The Seoul Administrative Court has also issued an injunction for vaccine pass mandates at cram schools and study cafes. The upcoming court decision may be critical in shaping the government's future prevention strategy.
An official, meanwhile, at the earlier COVID-19 joint briefing did mention that the government is anticipating those results to come out soon. So when asked about whether any countermeasures are being prepared, given that social distancing measures have been extended for 3 additional weeks, this official said a total of 10 lawsuits have been filed so far regarding vaccine pass mandates, and that 3 of those cases are currently in court, which only affect individual venues. So for now, he downplayed concerns over any immediate setbacks for their new prevention measures that come in effect on Monday.
Right, on Monday. And staying with that briefing, so I hear that it included an explanation behind the recent extension of restrictions here in the country.
Right, Sunny. So if you look at past patterns, this would be a situation where the downward trend in cases and rising number of fully vaccinated as well as boosted people and also more availability of hospital beds may have led to more relaxed measures or maybe a more shortened extension of these current measures. But it is the Omicron variant playing a big factor right now. So let's take a listen to what Health Minister Kwon Dok-cheol had to say.
The Omicron variant will become the country's dominant strain over the next 3-week period. At the same time, we also need to respond to the Delta variant, which carries a higher risk of serious illness, thus challenging our containment efforts. However, if we can suppress the number of serious cases and maintain stability in our medical capacity, from then on, we may be able to gradually ease our restrictions step by step.
Sunny, notice how the minister was quite certain about the Omicron variant becoming the dominant strain, whereas earlier officials have been commenting or rather suggesting that the Omicron variant could become the dominant strain here in Korea. And that's why, despite authorities hoping last year that the autumn harvest or Chuseok holidays would be the last ones where these nation's people have to make sacrifices on such big national holidays, now Kwon said that they have to respond against the current risks in a more conservative way.
Right, and that is why I understand special containment measures have been set aside for the Lunar New Year holiday.
Exactly. So as the timing of the Omicron variant becoming dominant may coincide with Lunar New Year, which falls on the 1st of February this year, with most people expected to enjoy a 5-day holiday until the 2nd of February, the government decided to implement a special 2-week prevention period, which starts on the 20th this month. And this to reduce the chances instances of infections that may occur during mass travel that's usual for Korea's Seoul holiday or Lunar New Year holiday. Now, train tickets will only be available for window seats. Ferries can only take 50% of capacity for passengers, and eating and drinking will be forbidden at highway rest areas. There won't be any discounts for toll fees on expressways, which was a norm on big national holidays before the pandemic. Visitations to nursing hospitals and other nursing facilities will be banned for the 2-week prevention period. Officials encouraged citizens to phone their families in their hometowns or make video calls and express their regrets that the current situation won't allow for in-person gatherings, hoping this will be the last time it is the case before we return to normalcy.
Right, and moving forward now, news of this extension in restrictions has not been well received by small business owners. Having said that, what is the latest with regard to pandemic-related financial assistance for these businesses?
Well, Sunny, at the earlier joint government briefing, not only Kwon Duk-cheol, the health minister, attended, but also Hong Nam-gi, the nation's finance minister, and he said there is going to be an extra budget that will help these small business owners. So let's take a listen to the details.
In our last round of relief payments, we provided 3.2 million small business owners with 1 million won each in financial assistance. Additional pandemic aid of 3 million won each, amounting to 10 trillion won in total, will be distributed this time around to small business owners who've reported revenue losses to support their livelihoods and ease their burden from rent, wages, and fixed costs.
Right, and looking ahead, how are authorities preparing for the onslaught of Omicron here in the country?
Well, they're looking, they laid out 2 response measures, one that will focus before the Omicron variant becomes the dominant strain, and during that span, they will try to focus their attention on keeping the daily number of infections down. Now, once the Omicron variant becomes the dominant strain, they will focus their PCR testings for the senior population aged 65 and above. And also they are considering whether they need 4th shots or the 2nd booster shot for elderly people and also for people that are vulnerable. Meanwhile, contact tracing is also going to prioritize for people at higher risks than others. And the quarantine period for people that have recovered from the Omicron variant is going to be decreased from 10 to 7 days. Now, what actually defines dominance here is once we have more than 50% of the cases being the Omicron variant, that is when the Omicron variant is going to be considered as being the dominant strain. And that will be when we have around 7,000 daily infections. That's when the government is expected to transition into a response focused on the Omicron variant. And speaking of 7,000, the official also gave an example of Japan, which recently saw a huge jump because of the Omicron variant.
Just to fill you in with more details on the situation in Japan, the country had only reported around 450 daily COVID-19 cases in the beginning of January, but now its single-day tally is hovering around the 18,000 mark. In just 2 weeks, the figure has increased around 40-folds, and this really shows how powerful the Omicron variant is, which currently accounts for more than 80% of the new infections there. And meanwhile, in the U.S., daily figures is nearing 800,000 with the rampant spread of the Omicron variant. According to the New York Times, the country's 7-day moving average showed 780,000 daily cases. This is more than double what was reported 2 weeks earlier. With Omicron accounting for more than 98% of the infections, health experts say the variant will likely have a serious impact on all 50 states.
Right, and keeping that in mind, very briefly, what are the implications of that kind of scenario on our testing capabilities?
Right, Sunny, it might not be that easy to get tested for the virus like right now, because if once the government focuses their testing on senior citizens, and that is why officials say that they're going to look into ways to expand testings for the regular people, and those results may also be applied to the vaccine passes as well.
I see. All right, so as always, thank you. See you on Monday. Minjung, thank you for your input.
Thank you.
As broadly expected, Seoul's central bank has raised its policy rate. It now stands at 1.25% and comes in response to concerns over inflation. Our Kim Sung-min reports.
The Bank of Korea on Friday pushed up its key interest rate, bringing the rate back to pre-pandemic levels. The interest rate is now set at 1.25%, up 25 basis points from the previous figure. The rate raise comes only 2 months after the central bank hiked its key interest rate to 1%. This seemingly hawkish move, however, has been widely expected among pundits amid growing inflationary pressure. Consumer prices have been staying above 3% during the previous 3 months, far higher than the central bank's target of 2%. Inflation expectations, the rate at which consumers and businesses expect prices to rise over the course of 2022, also stood at 2.6%. Pundits also assume that the global trend of tightening monetary policies influenced the decision. The rate hike is on par with other major economies, with some speeding up their policy tightening faster than expected. Recently, the Federal Reserve strongly hinted at least 3 rate hikes this year, with some expecting 4 rate rises. Friday's rate increase, however, comes amid lingering economic uncertainties stemming from the fast-spreading Omicron variant. Though the country is on a recovery track, some assume that the hike could disrupt the still fragile recovery trend. The Bank of Korea says a 0.25% rate hike means additional annual interest payments of $2.7 billion. Kim Sung-min, Arirang News.
And in other news, Pyongyang has responded to Washington's sanctions in light of its recent missile testings by decrying the Biden administration's punitive measure. Our Kim Dami has details.
North Korea has warned that Pyongyang will be forced into a, quote, stronger and certain reaction if Washington continues to take a confrontational stance against the regime. In a statement issued by the North state media on Friday, a spokesperson for the Foreign Ministry said the North's recent development of a new type of weapon was a part of efforts to modernize its national defense capability. A reiteration of the North's long stance that it will not give up on its, quote, right to self-defense. But experts note it's a burden for both Pyongyang and Washington to continue in the current situation amid such tension, with the U.S. already having confrontational relations with China and Russia. The North's number one task still is improving people's livelihoods amid economic difficulties due to pandemic border closure. Pyongyang also toned down the warning slightly by issuing the statement from a foreign ministry spokesperson. South Korea's unification ministry on Friday once again urged the North to respond to Seoul's efforts to create peace on the Korean peninsula through dialogue, while pledging to keep close tabs on Pyongyang. The North's warning on Friday came just a day after Washington slapped sanctions on 6 North Koreans for their roles in procuring equipment and technology for the regime's missile programs, the Biden administration's first to specifically target the North's ballistic missile tests. U.S. Ambassador to the UN Linda Thomas-Greenfield also proposed UN sanctions following the North's 6 ballistic missile launches since September 2021. North Korea test-fired what it claims to be a hypersonic missile on Tuesday, the second such a launch in less than a week. Kim Dami, Arirang News.
One tech jargon that has become quite common amid the pandemic is the term QR code. Our Shin Yeon has more on this system of information gathering and sharing.
Nowadays, it's hard to live in Korea not learning how to use this. A QR code. This code is needed almost everywhere, from hospitals and banks and restaurants to even traditional markets.
This is mostly because of the pandemic. South Korea built the world's first blockchain-based COVID-19 vaccination verification system. The system, known as KUV, proves people's vaccination status and is used as a vaccine pass. While these passes are needed almost everywhere, not everyone finds them easy to use.
To scan a QR code, you need to be able to see, but blind people can't do this, so they can't even visit a hairdresser. There needs to be an alternative option for them, like installing a machine that the blind can just place their phones on and the scanning happens automatically.
Seniors aren't as familiar with learning how to use such technology, so we've been providing free outreach programs where we teach them how to scan a QR code and show their vaccine passes at different venues.
While there are some hurdles still left to tackle, more and more industries are developing QR codes. Like the CEO of a startup I talked to, who has been trying to make every transaction possible with the scan of a QR code.
QR codes do much more good than harm for both business owners and customers. For customers, it's easier. They just need to scan a QR code to pay. Businesses also save a lot of money on credit card commission fees.
The district of Yongsan-gu has thought up a clever way to help tourists. They made a QR map. A scan of a QR code opens up a VR screen, which shows what each attraction and site has to offer before tourists go see for themselves.
Originally, I would have to ask my friends or search online to find out which locations are the best to visit. But this QR map allows me to see what different locations look like before I've even arrived at the district.
Already a pioneer in digital technology, South Korea is set on making even more improvements to its QR code system. 신예은, Arirang News.
Right, and advances in technology are also seeking to offer broader access to the art of music for those with hearing loss here in the country. Our Kim Bo-kyung has more on this campaign.
How do you enjoy concerts or the theater if you couldn't hear? Not everyone can enjoy the cultural events that we take for granted. The Electronics and Telecommunications Research Institute has come up with an innovative gadget, a wearable tactile tone system that delivers the tone of an instrument in the form of vibrations. This allows the hearing impaired to enjoy music. The wearable glove converts the sound frequencies into tactile patterns. It has been used in real 국악 performances, allowing hearing-impaired audiences to experience tunes of Korea's bamboo instrument daegeum.
이 진동이라는 느낌이 박자와 딱 맞게 떨어진다는 것을 깨닫게 되고 그것을 마음으로 느끼게 되고 더 내용을 풍성하게 느꼈습니다.
The developers say this technology could be used for educational purposes.
People with hearing impairments do not have experience of hearing tunes, so it is hard for them to sing. If they use this system, they would be able to enjoy music like we do and learn pitches and tones educationally.
Yet innovative gadgets cannot realize their purpose if they are not readily used in real venues. Knowing this, the state-run theater company has introduced systems to improve accessibility for the disabled by offering sign language interpretations by interpreters on stage, subtitles, and audio or screen descriptions.
Compared to interpretations for news, those for the art sector are much more difficult because we need to translate while subtly delivering context. We need to think about the intentions of the production team and actors.
It is important to have that will to enjoy the show together with those with disabilities before thinking about whether it is possible. It doesn't have to be perfect. What matters is to do what we can right now.
The National Theatre Company of Korea says it will continue pushing the boundaries so more groups of people can enjoy its shows.
People with different conditions all have the right to enjoy culture. And as a state-run company, we need to offer that. We're providing more pieces with services and making it the basic minimum.
Like how crashing the 1-inch barrier of subtitles could lead to new experiences, crashing other barriers could help the disabled access a whole unexplored world. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
On a rather fun note now, Baby Shark has become the most viewed YouTube video of all time with more than 10 billion views. Here's Eun-jin.
10 billion YouTube views. That is the new record for the number of views on the platform. With the world's population at some 7.8 billion people according to UN reports, the milestone figure suggests everyone on the planet has seen the record-breaking video at least once, and its cumulative viewing time comes to a total of 43,000 years. What's drawing even more attention is that the record was set by none other than a short Baby Shark dance sing and dance clip, which passed the historic viewing figure on Thursday at around 4 p.m. Korea time. The song has an overwhelming lead over its nearest competitor for the top spot, with second place secured by Luis Fonsi and Daddy Yankee's mega hit Despacito with 7.7 billion views. Once a campfire chant or song believed to have been created by camp counselors, the song became largely popular in 2016 when the South Korean entertainment company Pinkfong produced the YouTube music video version. The video topped global records, setting a new Guinness World Record as the most viewed video on YouTube with 7 billion views in November of 2020. And while staying on the throne for 15 months, it has broken its own record by hitting the 10 billion views milestone. The track even made it to the global music charts, ranking number 32 on the Billboard's Hot 100 and number 6 on the British official charts in 2019. Its catchy tune and easy-to-learn lyrics has made Baby Shark much loved by children, teachers, and parents, as well as babysitters across the world. 이은진, Arirang News.
Once a week in this corner, we highlight major issues in one particular country through the words of journalists or pundits there. Today, we turn to neighboring China, where preparations for the Beijing Winter Olympics are underway amid efforts to contain the pandemic. I have Fabian Kretschmer live on the line. Fabian, welcome.
Hello from Beijing.
Right, let's start with the COVID-19 situation over in China then.
Yeah, so I mean, right now the COVID strategy basically is put to its biggest test here. You could say that Omicron is a game changer that could change many things here for China. Until very recently, the country was successful with imposing strict lockdowns whenever there were infection clusters and also mass testing and closed borders. But with every new variant that was introduced, for example, Delta also increased already the frequency of lockdowns and also the number of cases. And now with Omicron, that danger is, of course, even higher. We right now have several cities under lockdown, at least 3. And just yesterday, there were also cases in Shanghai, in Dalian, so in many big cities. So I would say right now it's really a critical situation for the situation here in China.
Right. Fabian, I understand the latest outbreak has spread from Tianjin to Anyang, and I understand that the outbreak in Tianjin is a cause of much concern for authorities there. Do you care to elaborate?
Yeah, I mean, there are several reasons for that. And one is that in Tianjin, it was the first time that Omicron cases have been detected outside the quarantine bubble. Before that, there were only some Omicron cases from imported travelers, but they were kept basically in the quarantine rooms. And now Tianjin, there were local infections. So Omicron is very sensitive because it's very infectious. And so far, in China, you use the traditional vaccines, not the mRNA vaccines. And according to first temporary data, they're not really effective against Omicron. And the second issue is that Tianjin is very close to Beijing, the political capital and the capital of China. That's always very sensitive. And the government here places a lot of effort to keep the capital virus-free also ahead of the Olympics. And later on, there will be the 20th Party Congress, the big political meeting where the state leader Xi Jinping will declare his third term in office, most likely. And so Beijing should be virus-free by all efforts here.
Right. Now, Fabian, as you mentioned, in response to resurgence in COVID-19 cases, entire cities have been shut down within hours to curb the spread. What more can you tell us about the measures in place to contain the latest situation in China?
Yeah, I mean, the zero COVID strategy here is really a deal in the society where a minority really takes a lot of or makes a lot of sacrifices for the well-being of the majority. You can see that, for example, in Anyang or in Tianjin or also in Xi'an, there are really only, maybe a couple of hundred cases, and millions of people have to lock down. And lockdown doesn't mean the same as it would mean, for example, in Europe or some other parts in the world, but really people cannot leave their house, cannot leave their residential compounds, and really, the only thing that they can do is when they go outside is to get tested. It's really a big sacrifice of the people, and has also caused a lot of concern because there were reports on social media that food deliveries that is organized by the government are not arriving on time. There were also several cases of people who had heart attacks were not admitted to hospitals on time because they couldn't provide a COVID test, or even a pregnant woman who was refused from the hospital and then had a miscarriage. So those rising costs become even more revealing now.
Right, and Fabian, how are authorities responding to such unfortunate situations in light of their containment efforts?
I mean, they take measures, and for example, the officials from the hospital that didn't allow the pregnant woman, they were punished. But what actually is really obvious to me is that it's a systemic result of those strict measures. I mean, it's not individual cases only. And as long as the system doesn't change, it's hard also to avoid those deaths also. I mean, there are many social media users who criticize it and who ask, really, is it necessary to still keep that really, really rigid and radical measures? But on the other hand, from my understanding, many Chinese also support the zero COVID strategy because they think, okay, we have some negative side effects, we have some collateral damage, but overall, I mean, our numbers look very good. We have really almost no deaths from COVID and only very few infected persons.
Right, compared to quite a few places across the globe, of course. Moving forward, Fabian, against the backdrop of a resurgence in COVID-19 cases and diplomatic boycotts of its Winter Games, how is Beijing seeking, that is, to ensure a safe and successful event?
Yeah, I mean, the Beijing Games, I mean, they are really very perfect, I would say. I mean, there's a sealed off COVID bubble, and I don't think there will be a lot of cases spilling over to the general public because really the measures are very, very strict. However, the political dimension is much more complicated for Beijing to handle. You can really see the widening gap between the West and also China, because within China, it's just a success story. The Olympic Games will be basically the success of a rising world power, while in the West there's always talk about the diplomatic boycott, about the human rights violations, and you could imagine that you could expect that China will deal with those accusations, but the opposite is true. I mean, basically here within China, the government is ignoring the criticism and really just tries to control the narrative and just ignore everything that is accused against them.
I see. All right, Fabian, thank you very much for the latest update from China, which is preparing for the Winter Olympics come in about 3 weeks' time.
Thank you.
An important agenda for the globe this year, and of course beyond, is tackling climate change. For more on this pressing issue of universal concern, I have Professor Chung So-young from Korea University. Professor Chung, it's a pleasure to see you again.
Nice to see you.
I also have Kim Chu-jin, the Managing Director of Solutions for Our Climate. It's a pleasure to have you with us, Director Kim.
Thank you very much.
Right, Professor Chung, we'll start with you. 9 out of 10 people here in the country claim to have experienced firsthand the repercussions of climate change and are willing to embrace inconveniences arising from related policies to tackle the matter. Having said that, do you believe, Professor Chung, that the impact of climate change has been tangible here on the local front?
Yes, of course. I think we already lost our beautiful falls and then spring seasons, and then thereby we don't produce the apples anymore in the Daegu region, and then we start to catch sort of the fishes that used to be not available nearby the Korean Peninsula. So people are suffering, I would say, from the very drastic change of climate that has resulted in even bringing the very innovative policy matters up front. As we see that we talk a lot about the carbon neutrality and some other measures, even if there are some disagreements among the stakeholders, but we are heading toward to tackle all these crises even in Korea.
Right, and Ms. Director Kim, what can you tell us about the changes in climate conditions here on the domestic front over the course of recent years?
We are. I mean, I come from an environmental advocacy group, which basically chases emission reductions, emission sources. I mean, coal power has been a area that we've been trying to reduce emissions from. Natural gas, the steel sector are areas that we try to seek emission reduction from, and we do monitor the changes that our citizens share in that process. As a person in the forefront of this work, we do see changes coming fast. People 5 years ago, when we first began our work on coal power, had no idea that coal was associated with air pollution or climate change. It's very clear in our policy and in the general public that coal is something that we must avoid. Natural gas as well, the sentiment on natural gas is changing. And above all, the voice of the youth, which is very important in this election, in the upcoming presidential elections, is becoming more and more important in the climate field.
Right. Director Kim, some pundits claim that the recent hike in coffee prices here in the country is also a result of climate change. Do you care to explain the link?
Well, certainly it should be. The extreme climate events are increasing, and it will become more increased as the carbon dioxide level concentrations grow. I mean, just 2 years ago, everybody experienced more than 50 days of rain, which is a result of climate change. According to a 2020 study by the WMO, the World Meteorological Organization, the impacts in Korea alone by extreme weather events is $87 billion US dollars. Yes.
I see. Professor Chung, now that we've agreed that the impact of climate change is tangible, let's focus on current efforts to tackle this particular problem then. First up, last month, the international community met in Glasgow for the COP26 to explore ways to ease greenhouse gas emissions. What are your thoughts on that recent effort?
Well, we have been hearing from the different evaluation on the final outcome of the Glasgow. Some group of people said it was not sufficient enough. Others are still, it's okay. We are moving ahead. I think overall, from the ideal perspective, then of course it was not sufficient enough to tackle every aspect of climate, including coal matters. Countries agreed on the phase down the coal, not the phase out the coal, and then bringing the reality. I don't know whether Mr. Kim would agree with me on this matter. Some countries may have their very urgent circumstances to rely on coal, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to continue to use the coal. But international efforts must be made more to actually working together with those difficult countries to phase out coal as soon as possible. They cannot do it alone. There is a need for the concerted efforts. That applies to our domestic situation as well. Korea used to rely on coal, but because of our greenhouse gas emission record, we have to phase it out. And then not only one country of the coal power plant, they cannot do it all at all. We have to work together in the context of, we say, just the transition. We need to work together, sharing the burdens together and creating the opportunities together. We let them actually think about, okay, phasing out is necessary. However, we have to provide a new venue for them to work together with us. So everything needs to be orchestrated at all.
Right. As a scholar, Professor Chung, what are your thoughts on perhaps the idea that India made some concessions at the COP26? There are some pundits who believe that it took the country itself, India, took some great steps to join the global effort in easing greenhouse gas emissions. What are your thoughts?
Well, we are talking about the 2050 carbon neutrality, but they said 2070. But however, according to the past record of what India has been doing, actually they show the significant signals to international society. They are ready to engage in our global efforts. Of course, it is not enough for us to see, but once again, as I said, that's why United Nations and other countries, even private sectors, and the civil societies and academia, we all need to work together to find a better way for India to come up to not even 2070 or before to achieve their carbon neutrality.
Right. Director Kim, President Moon Jae-in also attended the UN Climate Conference. How do you assess perhaps Korea's role in the global climate campaign?
Many think that what role would a small country like Korea would have, but actually it does have a bigger than expected role. I mean, not just because of the size of the economy, but the role it plays in the economy. Last year, one of the important announcements, that climate-related announcement that came from Korea was the announcement in April by President Moon to no longer finance coal power plants abroad. What happened after that is interesting. It stopped our export of coal power plants. That's the good thing, but it didn't stop there. Japan followed a month later, 3 months later, and then China followed 5 months later. Made similar. There may be slight variances, but they made similar announcements. And then in between that, what happened was Indonesia was making its power plan, and they canceled a lot of new coal power plants that were in the pipeline. And the emissions from these new coal power plants that could have been built are the level of countries. So a small thing that happened to us because of our role in the financial sector, because of the size of our economy, does have a very big impact, especially in the Asia region.
Right, I see. Professor Chung, Korea has also pledged carbon neutrality, like you mentioned, by the year 2050 and a green growth development plan. What are your personal prospects with regard to these ambitious plans?
Well, two matters. Number one, Korea tries to play its sort of the global leadership role by engaging this challenging policy at the domestic level, and then Korea established its institutional basis like commissions of the carbon neutrality, and then it introduced the basic acts legislation actually to implement this, and then that it committed to work together with more global partners on this. So it shows a good momentum not only at the domestic level but also at the international level. However, as sometimes say that we are heading toward the next new president election, actually, this March. And then the question is whether or not the current efforts can be continued or revised, whether or not it's a better way or worse way, we don't know. So next president, next government must come up with sort of the consultative signals, no matter who will be the next president, on how to address climate change. And here, Moon's administration policy needs to just provide a very soft stepstone, actually, for the incoming government to launch a more aggressive, more active climate policy, eventually to achieve the carbon neutrality by 2050.
Right, because there needs to be definite consistency with the plan. Director Kim, the general accord, as you mentioned, is that fossil fuels, they power the world's economy. Having said that, what looks to be the economic impact of declining fossil fuels?
Well, by the way, the International Energy Agency publishes data on what kind of new rural energy investments happened each year, and you can really clearly see how fossil fuel investments, especially in the power sector, decrease. And to that, how that reflects in the Korean economy. That means that a lot of equipment manufacturers in the Gyeongnam province are losing their business, those who are fully exposed to coal power. So that's happening to us. Oil and gas also is decreasing, and Korea's share in the LNG carrier or oil carrier business, so making big vessels for carrying oil and gas, basically pipeline like things, is like 89% of the world market share. So the Korean economy is heavily exposed to those impacts, and we should be prepared. And the world will change with the decline of fossil fuels, the emergence of battery-based cars, and we should check whether that global impact how that will happen in Korea.
Are we doing our checking, though, in your opinion?
Not that much. Coal is something that we are currently experiencing. There are a lot of power companies or construction companies that were reliant on coal power related business are really feeling the shock there. And shipbuilding industry should also be prepared.
I understand this might be a difficult question, but Director Kim, are there any ways perhaps that you would like to propose to perhaps deal with that potential problem in the long run?
In our financial system, the carbon footprint, so how much a certain activity will cause damage on climate should be reflected in our financial regulations. That will provide a clear signal to people running money on what should be done and what should not be done, what's risky or not. I think that's something that should be a must right now.
Right. Professor Chung, how do carbon neutrality pledges by Korea and some of its counterparts look to affect the raw materials industry this year?
Well, you are talking about the energy market. It brings the very difficult situation to answer to everybody. not only because of the carbon neutrality policy itself, but because of the COVID-19, there is a lot of disruptions in energy supply chain. So I think these two matters will affect this year's situation a lot. Well, President Moon visited Australia in the regard last year and made a MOU with Australia to secure the sort of the consistent supply of the important raw materials, including energy materials from Australia. I think that this year still that there will be increasing demands of the hydrogen and then renewable like solar and wind power and then some other materials. And then question is whether or not we will work together, we will be able to work together to ensure the sustainable supply of them. In the sense that I see that some level of the interactions have been done a lot. Even as I just mentioned, President Moon visiting not only these countries, also I know that he is visiting Egypt and then the Middle East countries soon, and I'm sure that one of the top agenda will be about how to secure this sustainable supply of the energy materials in the broader context of the boosting the energy market in a sustainable way.
Right, to ensure green growth.
Right.
Director Kim, as mentioned earlier, Korea hopes to go carbon neutral by the year 2050. What would you see as some effective ways of ensuring that particular reality?
I think, there are people who question that reality. I believe it is possible. Renewable energy is, I would say, the most technically available and cost-effective way to do that. You can see changes in the power system in Jeju Island, for example, where a carbon neutral future can become really realistic, because Jeju Island, if you go to Jeju Island, sometimes very often during the day, the system is powered 60% by renewable energy, wind and solar, basically, and the province itself thinks that they can power the system by 30% of renewable energy. And then to hear people here, many of our experts, that's impossible, but it is possible. The technology is there. It's just that there are many, there are the incumbents resisting, and there are also regulations that support the incumbents in penetrating really new, good, innovative technologies.
So some red tape needs to be eased.
Yes, that's right.
Right. Professor Chang, what are some factors to keep in mind with regard to climate-related policies as we, like you mentioned, look ahead to the March presidential elections?
Well, I want to see two major candidates. They started to say something about the climate in recent days, like in their brief statements. However, I'm hoping that Korea is pursuing to be a global player, and climate is truly a global agenda. And Korea is best situated to address this issue from global perspective as playing a bridging role between developed and developing countries. In that regard, I do hope that our new government will make a huge grand plan in how we can cope with climate from global perspectives by getting Korea to be more able to engage in global efforts, utilizing some systems available under the Paris Agreement, also based on our Green New Deal policy, our new ODA policy, as we just talked about expanding carbon neutral based energy market in the world. There are many things that we can do. I do hope that they will make a black point in their policy statement by the new government on climate.
Right, hopefully that will be the case. Director Kim, essentially efforts to address climate change will depend on the dedication of individuals to the cause,
certainly,
right?
Yes.
Would you like to elaborate then on your thoughts?
Well, certainly, yes. Individual actions should play, and will play a significant role in global climate action. I think the best way individuals can react to climate change is to make our policymakers know that I am sensitive about this issue. This is very important. This can affect where I vote, to which party I vote. Because individuals can not use a lot of plastic cups or things like that. But one of the emissions that can be reduced by not using plastic cups can be easily offset by one decision by a policymaker to close early a coal power plant, something like that, and showing that signal, showing that sensitivity to our policymakers is going to be very important.
And what are some plans that your entity, Solutions for Our Climate, have for this particular year to help perhaps Korea secure carbon neutrality in the years ahead?
We engage from various fronts. I mean, I'm here today in a newsroom. Appearing in these scenes is a way we talk about climate. We work with many policymakers, not just policymakers, but also legislators. We also sometimes may have to go to court. Our team is representing a youth group in a climate litigation, a litigation saying that our national climate target is not enough. So those are the things that we do. Yeah.
Right, that is good to know then. Professor Chung, what are some upcoming climate-related events to look forward to this year?
Well, usual suspects include COP27 in Egypt, and then Bali, G20. I think G20 is getting more important. And the special attention in the context of the role of Korea needs to be given to World Forest Congress in May. This is the largest intergovernmental meeting in the forest sector. We all know that the forestry sector has become one of the key sector in addressing climate change. And I think all of us also has to take a look at World Forest Congress in May in Seoul.
Right, we'll look forward to that. All right, Professor Chung, as always, thank you very much for your thoughts. Director Kim, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much.
Right, and on that note, we say goodbye. We'll be back with more coverage on Monday. Have a safe weekend. Thank you for watching.